Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Faith Focus Weekly Discipleship Podcast. My name is Kevin Rognus, and I'm the Discipleship Director here at Faith Covenant Church. We just want to say thank you, whether you're watching or listening on YouTube or any of the major podcasting platforms. Make sure you leave us a review on those if you're able to. That would be really appreciated. Let us know how we're doing and if there's anything we can do differently. So today, I am joined by our dear friend, Pastor Sara Sosa. We're very glad to have you here.
It's fun to be back.
Yeah. Sarah always just has really good insights, and I don't always get to benefit from them because you mostly work with families and kids, which is not my area and not my season of life.
It could be your area, though.
I don't think it is, and I don't think it's supposed to be.
You just never know when God might change your call.
That's true. I never do know.
You do some moonlighting things, like you show up for VBS and little things along the way. So
I do like making mazes for Jubilee. So next time, if you're here next year for Jubilee, I will probably make a maze, and that's fun.
And it'll be amazing.
Amazing. No pun intended.
Oh, pun intended.
Actually, I intended.
Sadly, yes.
Well, Sarah's joining us today because we thought that it would be a good idea to just do a few episodes about different things that parents can do in leading their children into faith and discipling kids, and what does that look like? So today we're going to talk about traditions.
Yeah.
Traditions are all over the place, and especially now. So the week this episode comes out will be the week of Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving. And
perfect.
With that, Christmas is around the corner, and so there's just an abundance of traditions. And oftentimes, traditions aren't things that we think of. So what's a way that you kind of think of defining traditions?
I mean, I think they're those rhythms. Traditions tend to be more seasonal or like one-off. You're not something you do every week, but you do it once a year. Or once a month, maybe at the highest frequency. Easily within the church, one of our traditions that's monthly is to celebrate communion together, right? But another tradition that might not be so regular might be a baptism service, right? So there are those kinds of things. And so when you think of your family life, there's this sort of cadence, but it's not as regular as a habit, not as regular as a weekly rhythm, but more monthly or quarterly or yearly.
So are traditions biblical?
There certainly are traditions in the Bible, and as the church has grown through the years, there are a number of traditions that have been put in place that go with the church calendar. I don't know how many of you know there's an actual church calendar that's different from your Google Calendar or your Microsoft Office calendar, what other calendars you follow. But there are seasons to the church that don't have to do with nature. We think fall, winter, spring, summer when we think seasons, but there are church seasons like Pentecost and Advent and Lent, and those don't get talked about as much.
Right.
In the covenant denomination, off and on, depending on what church you go to, some churches will lift those up a lot. But if you're coming out of a Lutheran background or a Catholic background, something that's more formal and more liturgical, then the church seasons make sense. But there are a number of traditions that go along with church seasons, days to celebrate, things to not forget, stories to remember collectively as a congregation and as followers of Christ. And so those have been embedded throughout the years, and there's a little bit of conflict. Like if you think of all the traditions around Passover and Easter, heading into Easter, you could talk about are we talking about the Western Church or the Eastern Church, right? So there's different dates for things, but often celebrating the same or recognizing the same kinds of traditions. There are Jewish traditions that, for the most part, haven't trickled into mainstream Christianity. When you think of the Feast of Tabernacles or some of those Old Testament moments.
Hanukkah or Purim. Some of those different festivals.
Those, because they're not so directly related to Jesus, we haven't pulled them into sort of our existence in the church, but they are still there as part of our history. And it's actually kind of a fun thing as a family to explore the different festivals that are in the Bible
Yeah.
and why they're there and what stories they're commemorating. There's some rich history there. So, yeah, I do think that traditions are biblical. There's no mandate that says thou shalt have family traditions,
Right.
but there is, plenty of evidence for passing on the faith. And in that context, when you're thinking about traditions from a faith perspective, it becomes a vehicle for celebrating who God is, celebrating who Jesus is, for telling the stories and remembering from one generation to the next. So.
And I think an important part about knowing the history of traditions is to recognize that certainly in Jesus' day, but especially back in the times of the Hebrews, like Moses, Abraham, in those times, those traditions were so important because most of the society was not literate. And so even though they would have had some copies of Scripture around in synagogues and such, by and large, everything about the faith was transmitted orally, and that necessitated having traditions to create space for that.
Yes, for sure. Yep, agreed. Yeah, so I think traditions look a little bit different in contemporary setting than they would have in biblical times, but there's still certainly lots of tie-ins and good reason to have them around.
And there's also sometimes a tension of, we do this because it is tradition, and therefore it is a rule. There are times when we need to kind of interrogate some traditions too and say, is this a rule that we have to follow? Is it a biblical command from God? Or is it a tradition of the church? If it's a tradition of the church, that may be a well and good thing. We just have to be aware of what's a biblical command and what's a tradition. Because if we're enforcing traditions, that may not always be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. And then alongside that would be some of the secular traditions that we've picked up along the way, things that our families did while we were growing up that we've now incorporated into our own families. And an easy one for me, since we're heading into Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, growing up, my dad used to take us to the toy store, my older brother, my younger brother, and I. And we would all get little spiral-bound notebooks and a pencil, and we could just go up and down the aisles in the toy store and make a list of items we might like for Christmas, a wish list, right? And that way my parents knew what we wanted and knew they would be getting something we would actually be excited about as a gift when they saw our lists. And we always called it the toy tour. So
love that.
So it happens to be on Black Friday, right? So the toy tour, and then
And you don't do that anymore.
Well, actually, interestingly, I do. So when I had my own kids then, and we moved to Minnesota and are close to my parents, my dad right away was like, "Can I take your kids on the toy tour?" And
That's
I'm like,
awesome.
"If you want your dad, have at it." And of course, at some point, the toy store is not it. Like, it's not exciting when you're a
Right.
teenager. So he started taking them to the Mall of America for the toy tour.
That's
And
intense.
like, yeah, Grandpa.
Especially the day after
Grandpa with the
Thanksgiving. Did he
kids.
keep
Oh,
doing
yeah.
it the day after Thanksgiving?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yep.
that's a lot.
Yeah, so totally secular tradition, but something to look forward to. And this year, my dad said that he feels maybe he's too old. He's 83.
Yeah.
He'll be 83 and a half, whatever. And he just knows my mom can't do it, and so he's feeling like we should just go without him. And my kids are like aghast.
Yeah.
Like, how do we do this without him?
Mm-hmm.
And there have been years when I've kind of ducked out because it was kind of his thing with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they're both looking squarely at me like, we're doing the toy tour, right? And I'm like, why? There's
Make
like,
me a list.
There's no need to actually go to the Mall of America. They're like, what do you mean? So
Well, especially the day after Thanksgiving. That's like the last day that you want to be there. Like
Yeah.
maybe like 3 days later.
Yeah, so you have this gamut, and when you look at traditions, there's the stuff that is important, but it really isn't important, right?
Mhm.
Like you do it, and it's fun for the fun of it, for the camaraderie, that sort of secular side of things, and then you've got faith traditions, and then you've got, like you said, actual commands out of Scripture for the ways we should order and live our lives. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we talked a bit about the purpose of traditions within the church and within the faith as a way of continuing on teachings and telling the story of God and the story that we're a part of. What is some of the purpose of traditions within, on the more familial level, or maybe a little bit more broadly sometimes like the church level? Because there are traditions at Faith Covenant specifically
Sure.
has around certain holidays.
Sure.
So what are some of the purposes of those traditions?
Yeah. Um, when you think of like seasons like Christmas and Easter are the easiest places to sort of look to, and there's this preparation time heading toward both of those celebrations. So
Hmm.
Christmas time you've got Advent, the 4 weeks leading up to the birth of Jesus. That is an encouragement to get ready, right?
Hmm.
To get ready, and we have an opportunity as followers of Jesus and within family groups, whatever family makeup you have, right? To take that lead in time to remember, remember the story, remember pieces of the story. The church often helps us do that by the sermon series that happens the
Hmm.
Sundays in December or other events. But it really is a chance also to sort of wrestle, I think, wrestle Christmas away from commercialism, right?
Yes.
Because there's so many other extra things that we put alongside a faithful Christmas that if we aren't careful, we just take for granted the story of God entering our world
Hmm.
and how important and breathtaking and ridiculous that
Hmm.
is. Like honestly, if you think about it, it's like you decided to come as a baby. Oh, okay. So
What?
it's kind of funny. And same thing with Easter. You've got this season of Lent. The anticipation of Christmas and the anticipation of Easter, different, because to get to Easter, you have to go through Good Friday. So
Mm.
the Lent season has sort of a more of a mourning to it, not
Hmm.
not mourning as in sunrises in the morning, but mourning like sadness, a heaviness. Yeah,
Mourning.
and just this chance to really kind of sit with the sacrifice of Christ on our behalf. And what does that mean to me? And that's why you'll get some people have the tradition of giving something up for the season of Lent.
Hmm.
And it's meant to be a personal thing that you choose to do that catches your attention and allows you to refocus
Hmm.
on Christ and on his sacrifice and ultimate gift for us. Um, so those are the easiest places to look when you're thinking about faith traditions um, and the importance of those stories. Um, it there's so many pieces to the Christmas story. There's so many pieces to that Holy Week, leading up to the Last Supper, the rest in the garden, the trial, the crucifixion, this Saturday of silence, and then the triumph of Sunday, and then even beyond as
Hmm.
Jesus starts to appear to different people. Um, that it's worth it to stretch that out, right? To not not try to do the whole story in one go, but just focus on a piece of it at a time,
Right.
so that you can internalize it for yourself, but with kids, you're helping them become as familiar with the story as you are,
Hmm.
so that then when it's their turn to pass it on to somebody else, they'll be able to.
I also think about the value of traditions in community building,
Hmm.
because when there's this repeated thing that you do together, it solidifies the bonds of family or of church. It creates shared memories of experiences together, and it draws you close in an interesting way because it's like these are the people that I spend these holidays with or these times with.
Hmm.
There's something powerful in that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And even when you look at communion, I know the times that when I'm able to be the one leading communion for the church, I really love to to set that up in story form,
Yeah.
right? To remember, this is the meal that Jesus had with his disciples. Yes, but why were they having that meal? They were having that meal because of Passover. What is Passover? Now we have to go back to the Old Testament. We have to remember the story of Moses and how God used him to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. And that whole story is also multi-layered, and there's so much that's accessible to it. But if we don't go back and sit in it, we'll miss a lot. We'll miss things like Moses actually argued with God, and he's like, I'm not a good public speaker. I'm kind of shy. Like he's like, you got the wrong guy here. And how many times have we felt like God might be putting us in a certain situation or asking us to do something? We're like, whoa, I think you're kind of wrong, God. I'm not actually good at that,
All the time.
right? And God just isn't taking it. He's not having it for Moses. He's like, well, I'll give you your brother. Your brother Aaron can help you, And so it's just this push pull with Moses and God, and yet God uses him to accomplish something really big and really significant, using this series of really odd miracles, and culminating in, the Passover of the angel of death, and it's just, that's the story that sets up communion.
Hmm.
And if we don't get all the way back there, we're missing a tie-in to the
Yeah.
history of who we are and how long God's been at work in pursuing his people.
Hmm.
But when we do get there and remember it, and we're like, oh my gosh, you've been after us forever.
Yeah.
And
Thousands of
you've
years.
never given up.
Yeah.
Like, your patience with us is never ending. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's powerful. That's what we're talking about, and it's a community thing. And we do have the elements of the bread and the juice, something tangible that we can hold and see and taste.
Hmm.
So engaging our senses and remembering the story through these symbols. And um, you know, i- if you've ever had a chance to do a Passover or a Seder dinner, that whole meal is so full of symbolism and all the
Hmm.
different herbs and root and everything. Like, it's amazing. And so I don't know if I'm not supposed to say this, you should cut it out. But
No, it's
we're
okay.
hoping to be able to offer a Seder event this year for
Quite
the
possibly.
church.
Yep.
So we're working on that for the Lent season, for Good Friday in particular. It'd be a really neat experience for families
Yeah.
of any shape or size and kind to come and just hear the story around all of that, because it is directly related to what Jesus was doing on our behalf. So there's just a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of meaning in it, in some of these things, and there are off seasons. I mean, we think of Christmas, we think of Easter right away, but like I said, communion, baptism, those are things that we get to. Confirmation, a chance to just to say out loud what you believe and to confirm your faith. Say, this is, yes, I had this borrowed identity for a while, but now that I've had time to wrestle with it within the confirmation program, I'm standing before you and saying, I agree with that. I am choosing this. I'm choosing Jesus for me,
Yeah.
not because my mom told me to or my dad told me to or my Sunday school teacher told me to, but because I think it's right and I think it's true. That's a really powerful moment, too, to celebrate as a church. So we could go through the year. There are some lesser kinds of moments, but they all play an important part in the story of God
Hmm.
and how he's at work in our
So for families, I mean, there's a lot of traditions that you could choose
midst.
from. So how do
Yeah.
families go about deciding what traditions
Yeah.
to participate in?
Well, if you're a brand new family and listening in on the podcast, you're like in the best position because you're sort of at the start of this new chapter of your life, and you have the ability to have several conversations with each other and say, well, what traditions did you grow up? What traditions did you grow up at? And see what makes sense.
Hmm.
And maybe some of those are the same, and maybe some are different. And together you choose. We're gonna uphold this one, but not this one, and be thoughtful about it.
Hmm.
And why is it important? And that's true for both religious traditions, faith-filled traditions, and secular ones. You know, um, to just be able to honor one another as you begin a new family, that's blending two backgrounds, right?
Hmm.
And so to be able to have that conversation and be on board with each other, and then if and when kids come, you're set, you're ready to go. Like, you definitely have to have the conversation. What are we going to do with Santa?
Yeah.
What are we going to do with the Easter Bunny, right? Because it's in the world, right? So you have to make a decision. Are we gonna nix this completely? Are we gonna just see how it rolls out because of our kid and his or her temperament? Are we gonna, whatever? But have a conversation about it and decide. That's a secular thing, but it impacts your
Hmm.
family, right? And then just think it through. Are we going to do something special for Advent? Are we going to have an Advent calendar? Are we going to do Advent readings? Are we going to have candles in our own home that we light every Sunday,
Hmm.
as we share those stories of coming closer to Jesus? And um, there's all kinds of things that you can do. I know people who have, so nativity sets come with wise men. But the wise men weren't actually at the nativity. Sorry if I just blew somebody's mind by saying that. If you read through Scripture, they came about 2 years later
Yep.
when Jesus was a toddler in his home, not a baby in a manger. And so I know people who set up the nativity set, but they don't put the wise men in it. They put the wise men someplace else in the house, right?
Love
And
that.
as they're going through the season, they just move the wise men closer, and the kids will go get them and move them closer. And
Which to me, that sounds like more fun than Elf on a Shelf.
it is, yes, it's a little more meaningful. And then, they don't ever get to the manger. They're going to show up wherever Jesus is on Epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
So how many people celebrate that day, right?
Mhm.
And so when you think of 12 days of Christmas, that's where that comes from. It's from Christmas Day to Epiphany is 12 days. So January 6th, in case you're wondering. But that's the day that marks the wise men finding Jesus. And so, yeah, you could do those kinds of things as a family. Something that is fun, but it's faith-filled, right? And it allows you as a family to carry these stories forward. So you can think about that. You can think about Easter. Are you going to give something up for Easter? Are you going to go and get ashes on your forehead at an Ash Wednesday service? Why would you do that? And be able to talk about it. One tradition that I'd like to encourage families who choose to have their children baptized as infants. So in this church, we with babies, we'll do either baby dedication or infant baptism, whatever families just choose. And if they choose infant baptism, I like to encourage families to celebrate that baptism day the way you would celebrate a birthday.
Yeah.
So with a special cupcake, maybe with a candle in it, or just a baptism candle that you light every year. Some way hold that day sacred so that your son or daughter grows knowing you made this decision for them. And then when they get to confirmation, that gives the confirmation process an extra added layer of meaning, because now it's their chance to sort of take over from you the decision that you made for them when they were small.
Yeah.
If you do infant dedication, you could mark a dedication the same way, but it's a little bit different because you're not making a decision for them. Both of those, you are promising to raise your kids to know and love Jesus. So again, confirmation is going to be important down the road either way. But so you can have those kinds of traditions too that are personal to your family, but they carry a faith meaning behind them.
I just want to touch real quick on a thing you've mentioned a couple times. There are secular traditions, and oftentimes when Christians hear secular, they go, "Oh, bad." Not all secular traditions are bad by any means. Thanksgiving is not a Christian holiday.
Right.
It's a Christian concept, value to be thankful, certainly.
Yep.
But it's technically a secular holiday. So not everything secular, especially with some of these traditions, is a bad thing.
Yeah, but it's good to talk through. Like, what's your family going to do with Halloween? That's part of our culture. It's part of our world. Are you going to celebrate it or not? And if you choose not to, how are you going to help your kids navigate that at school? Have that conversation and decide what your game plan is. I totally out of nowhere tradition for the Sosa family, which was, when I was a kid growing up. In the fall, we would always go to the apple orchard and get apples and apple cider and apple rollovers and apple butter and apple everything, and pumpkins and the whole deal, and make a day of it. And then we would come home and make apple dumplings. That was our tradition. And my kids still are like, Are we doing that? Are we doing that? Are we going to the apple orchard? Which is hilarious because now, literally, the apple orchard takes 20 minutes. We park, we walk in, we get the apple-y things, and we leave.
Yeah.
Like, because they're too old to do the hay ride and the pumpkin, and they don't want to do any of that. So they don't want to log roll down the hill like they used to, and all these kinds of things. It's a
Now they're
totally
like, I have to do my own laundry. I don't want to get grass stains.
Yeah, it's a seasonal tradition that has nothing to do with anything. Yet it's important, and it's a family thing that we did and have done and still continue to do in a really lame kind of way, but we do it every fall.
Well, my family, me and my brothers didn't like candy, so we went trick-or-treating a couple of times. We were just kind of like, this is kind of pointless. And so we ended up going with another family who, they had a kid our age. His birthday was Halloween, and we would go to Grand Slam.
Oh,
and
that's
so
a good
that,
tradition.
for those of you who don't know, Grand Slam was this place that had indoor mini golf and bumper cars and laser tag and arcade and all the things. And it was great because nobody else was there. It was just us on Halloween. So we did that for a few years, and it was Awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You mentioned birthdays.
Mhm.
People often have traditions around birthdays,
Mm-hmm.
and you can make those faith-filled or not, or both,
Yeah.
right? Like it is a day to acknowledge that God brought you into existence, and we should celebrate that and remember that you were God's idea first and foremost. And to be like, woohoo, we're so glad that Kevin's here. Happy birthday, Kevin.
Hey.
Kind of thing. And so the birthdays are a big deal. But then alongside that, my dad doesn't like birthday cake. He wants birthday pie,
Mm.
and he wants peach pie. But unfortunately, his birthday's in May, and the peaches aren't ready until July, here in Minnesota anyway. And so he doesn't get birthday cake on his birthday. He gets peach pie in July for his birthday in May. I'm not even kidding. And
I love that.
my kids have grown up calling it Peaches Pie Day. Not just peaches. Peaches Pie Day.
That's
It's
great.
Peaches Pie Day for their grandpa. So he gets to celebrate his birthday twice, I guess. I don't know.
See, that's sneaky. That's
So-
clever. I need to figure out a way to do that.
I know. So, I mean, there's traditions all over the place that are just plain fun. And they just tell, they're not necessarily telling God's story, but they're telling the story of you and your family.
Mhm.
That's good.
So then, how do you, excuse me, how do you discern what traditions to leave behind? You mentioned that with like, newer families that are kind of combining maybe and saying, okay, what did you grow up with? What did I grow up with? What do we do this? There may also be seasons to leave traditions behind due to the death of a loved one, or just change in family structure, or kids growing up and moving out of the house, or getting married. How do you discern what traditions to leave behind, and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes, like you said, life dictates that for you. When I think of a lot of our traditions around holidays, they all often have to do with food.
Yes.
And so then the question
Yes.
is, who's going to carry those recipes forward and keep making them?
Yeah.
Right? So I took over the Thanksgiving pie baking from my mom. I make the apple pie, I make the pumpkin pie, because it just got harder and harder for her to do everything. I can pretty much guarantee neither one of my kids knows how to make a pie. They've watched me do it a gazillion times, but they've never actually. Well, maybe Emma has. Not very often have they actually rolled out a crust and put it in a pie plate and made the filling. Could they? Sure. Could they follow a recipe? Sure, they could follow a recipe.
Yeah.
Will they? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes traditions just break down on their own like that. And kids age out of things. At some point my dad stopped doing the toy tour with us, but then he picked it up with his grandkids.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and I didn't actually do it with them because he was doing it with them. So whether or not if they get married and have kids someday, if they'll do the toy tour, I don't know, you
Yeah.
know. So there's those kinds of things. I think faith-based traditions hold together better than secular ones do, because they're coming from something outside of you and outside of your family. They're things that God has given to the church and that the church has carried forward. So, Advent will always be a thing. Whether or not you engage in it is another question. Lent will always be a thing, right? So there's some things that will live on even if you don't fully engage them or not. But because they live on, you'll consistently, as long as you stay part of the church, you'll consistently be prompted to participate in some way. And so I think those traditions would be slower to let go of. And communion's going to happen whether you want it to or not, right?
Right.
It's part of the church service in a predictable pattern on a predictable Sunday. And so, you're losing sight of that tradition means you're not showing up at church, really.
Yeah.
And so I think, they can come and go for different reasons. Some of it is because you age out. Some of it is because the person who carried the tradition is no longer with us. Sometimes it's that you've taken yourself out of the mix somehow by not participating in church or not being involved in a community where those traditions have come from. So, yeah.
Well, I think, too, when it's a tradition that has ended due to the death of a family member or a divorce or circumstances like that, I think it's just important to acknowledge it and just say, hey, whether it's to yourself or with other
Mhm.
people in the family or in the friend group, say, hey, this is hard. That
Mhm.
this is the first Christmas without Grandpa or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Um, Call it out, acknowledge it,
Yeah.
and that's an important part of the grieving process.
Yes. Yeah. And I think sometimes families may choose to carry the tradition forward in honor of
Hmm.
that person. Like it helps us remember and love so and so we keep doing it. Sometimes you'll let go of it because it's just too hard
Hmm.
to do it without that person. So again, that conversation, the communication, you might tweak the tradition,
Hmm.
change it slightly so that it can carry a happier tone to it. It's not necessarily tied to a negative event, kind of thing. So yeah, you have within your power. You don't get to choose the faith traditions or the church traditions. You just get to choose whether or not and how you're going to participate in them.
Hmm.
All the other things we do, that's up to you. If you
Hmm.
want to keep doing them or not, that's your family's decision or an individual decision. So, um, but I think where you could end up stepping on toes is if you just stop doing something without talking it through with somebody else and
Right.
or explaining, to younger generations why you're not doing that anymore, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Lots to talk about there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, any last thoughts about traditions and anything that you want to wrap up the conversation with?
Just to say that I think they're worth pursuing. I really
Yeah.
do. Faith traditions, because they do carry on the story of who God is. It allows us to bring some of these bigger themes and ideas into our everyday lives and hold on to them and allow them to shape us and direct us as followers of Jesus. And the silly fun ones are just that again that you're building family relationships. You're building community. You're establishing this is who we are, a sense of an identity in Christ, and identity in one another as family members. And so I really encourage families to work on having traditions, not just around the holidays, but seasonally or as they creep up and around somebody's birthday or around an important date, when something happened that's meaningful.
Hmm.
Um, you know, my son made up a tradition. So, I mean, you can just pull something out of thin air and
Yeah.
just decide this is this,
Yep.
Um, maybe there are people out there who don't like Valentine's Day. So instead of Valentine's Day, you do something else,
Yep.
right? Like you just make your own day. Hallmark has made plenty of days.
Yeah.
So if a company can make a day,
Yeah.
you can make a day too. So I just think it's a great way to celebrate life, to have fun, to remember important things and build relationships with one another and with God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having
Sarah's
me.
going to be joining us for a few more episodes about different
Yay.
things with parenting and family and stuff like that. Stuff that
Yeah.
I have no clue about. So I know
A
how to
fun
uncle
friend.
pretty decently, but parenting is a whole different level. So we're excited to be with Pastor Sarah for a few more of those things.
But
So
you've been parented.
yes, I
So
have.
and you're an uncle.
I am.
Are you
Yes.
the fun uncle?
Oh, absolutely.
So you're the funkle?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I could maybe be more fun, but I'm still. I like to think I'm the funkle, but
yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
I bet you are.
Well, and like with that, I mean that is kind of a tradition I started with my niece and nephews. Like when my second nephew was having his first birthday, my older nephew had just turned 3. I was already overwhelmed with the idea of like, what do I get these kids for their birthdays? Because they already have everything, and like everything we've given to the 3-year-old is just getting passed down to the 1-year-old. So what do you even get the 1-year-old? So like
Yeah.
I started my tradition as an uncle of getting them their first piggy bank when they turn 1, and then after that for their birthdays, I just give them money.
There you
And
go.
my siblings were like, "Thank you, we have enough stuff in the house, we don't
Yeah.
need more." And then now the kids
Brilliant.
are like, "Oh, I get my money in my card now," and it's just kind of a funny
Good.
little tradition.
My
So
my nephew just turned 11, and so I had asked his dad, what does Jackson want for his birthday, and he sends me 3 things. One was a game for whatever, I don't remember if he's PlayStation or Xbox, but some soccer game. And my brother said that they were getting that for him, so don't get that. And then the other 2 things were Robux and cash.
yep.
And I had to actually Google what Robux is.
Roblox.
Well, so Robux is the currency, that you can use to buy things within the Roblox game.
Oh,
Yeah. So
no idea.
I know. So I had to
We're old,
I
Sarah.
had to Google that because
Yeah.
my kids are older, and I'm like, what is that? What is that?
See, I
So,
thought I knew. I thought you were making a mistake and be like, "No, Sarah, it's
no,
Roblox."
it's
But no, I'm
Roblox.
dumb.
Yeah, and so then I texted my brother. I'm like, don't at me. I had to Google that one, and he's like, oh, never.
Yeah.
So anyway, traditions, so
Yeah.
good. Do them.
Yep.
Highly recommend.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching or listening. Make sure you subscribe to make sure you don't miss any of our content. Have a wonderful and blessed day.